Hello all, welcome to today's workshop for the Business Support Fund. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, what I would like to do before we get started is just thank you for coming along. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So as a bit of an overview of what we're covering today, we're going to go over the application form for the Business Support Fund Stream 1. This is going to include Smarty Grants, which is our online application tool, and the key dates for the process. We'll go through the assessment process and the outcomes. We'll go through the application form in a lot of detail. We'll tell you how to write about your project in the application form. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the questions that we're asking you and the kind of responses that we're looking for. And there's going to be plenty of time for you to ask questions. So in terms of housekeeping for today's session, there'll be time for you to ask questions during the presentation. What I will ask you to do is to please keep your questions relevant to the application form section that we're in. So throughout the presentation, I'm actually going to be opening up the application form and going through it with you. If you do have questions about the application form, just keep them relevant to what's on the screen at the moment. If you do have any questions that aren't relevant to the application form process that we're going through, just save them to the end. There will be time at the end of the presentation to ask any other questions. So in terms of where you can ask questions, these can be done via the chat box on the right hand side of your screen. Might look at like the live event Q&A. Your questions will come through to the team and they'll publish them, and they'll either respond to them via writing, or my colleague Sarah will read them out to me at certain times throughout the presentation so I can respond to them verbally. So during today's session, we can only help with application process questions. We're not going to be able to help you out with specific project questions because we don't have probably enough time to go into detail about your specific project. If you did have any queries about your project, either throughout this session or in general, please email grantsinquiries@sustainability.vic.gov.au. We'll send through all of the relevant links at the end of the session as well. Now, any questions that we answer that are new questions and will add value will be made available on our information bulletin, which is available online on the grants page. Now, this session is being recorded and we are actually going to make it available online afterwards. So if you do want to look at it afterwards, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, if they're going through this application process with you, we will be making it available hopefully within about a week, and that will be posted to the information bulletin as well. On the info bulletin, you can also see a copy of the information session, which we've held 2 of now, and they provide more general information about the grants. This session is going to be very specific to the grant application form, and what we want to hope to do through the session is help you write a really good application. We want to give you the tips on how you can write well so that you put your best foot forward, really. So the next section I'm going to go through is just a bit of an application overview. So looking at the tips and tricks, the really important information for you to know, and some key dates. So firstly, what you're going to have to do to apply is actually create an account at sustainabilityvictoria.smartygrants.com.au. Now on our website under the grants tool, you can click through to create an account, and that's going to drop you into this Smarty Grants platform. We're going to take you there shortly. So there are different ways that you can access the form. You can have a look through by previewing a copy of the form, or you can register an account and actually just start plugging away in your application. Now know that we're not going to see anything in your application form until you click the submit button. So feel free to play in it as much as you want. Go back and forth. Now make sure that you save your application along the way. If your computer crashes, you might lose the information. If the web crashes, you might lose your information. So we think it's always best for you at the end of every page just to save the work that you've done before you move to the next page. Now, one thing I will say as a big tip is to allow ample time to upload attachments and to submit. We have had applications in the past through Smarty Grants that missed the cutoff time, and unfortunately they cannot be submitted and won't be reviewed in the application process. Technical difficulties is not a reason for having a late application, and our Smarty Grants platform will not allow you to click the submit button after 3 p.m. on Friday, the 12th of March. So there are mandatory fields in the application form. These are going to be marked with a red asterisk, and they must be completed. You won't be able to click submit if you have incompleted mandatory fields. Some areas have a word limit on the application form. You won't be able to exceed this word limit. Now, the word limit that we've provided to you is really a guide of the kind of answer that we'd be looking for. So if it says a word limit of 50 or a word limit of 100, we're looking for a short response. If there's a word limit of 500, we're probably looking for something a little bit more substantial there. Don't feel like you need to use all of the words and max it out. We would rather have clear, easy to read and simple answers where possible. Now, once the application is submitted, one thing I want to let you know is you cannot go back in and edit the form. If you do need to edit the form after you've submitted, let's say it was an accident that you submitted, you will need to email Grants Inquiries. They may be able to open your form again for you, but we're not going to be doing that on the day that applications are due. We need to have a 2-day turnaround to get back to your queries generally. So what I would say is try to submit your application as early as possible, at least a couple of days before the due date, because if you do have any technical errors, any issues or any questions that are preventing you from submitting, or if you need to reopen a submitted application, you need to give us the time to get back to you to help you out. And that's probably not going to happen a minute before or an hour before the applications are due. And the worst thing for us and for you would be if you can't get that application in, because we know how much hard work you're going to put into it. Now, as I've said a few times already, late applications just cannot be accepted. There may be some circumstances where we'll accept a late application, but the only one that I can really think of is health related. And we will be asking for evidence of that if you do have a late application. This needs to be a fair process to all, so we need to be making that a 3 p.m. sharp cutoff in Smarty Grants and really only considering certain circumstances like health related issues that have prevented you from submitting that button. Like I said, try to get things in early as possible. Now, Smarty Grants, if you do have any technical difficulties, you can directly contact the Smarty Grants team. If there's any platform problems, that's your best chance of hearing from someone, and they're available from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So, a few pro tips. As I've just said, plan your time, don't submit at the last minute. Incomplete or late applications will not be submitted. Now, submit only when you're certain that everything is done and complete. Click the save button before you submit and it will let you know if anything's missing. Go back and finish those things. Read through and be very thorough, because once you click that submit button, it is quite hard to get back into that application form. Now, one thing that we want you to do is include all critical information in the application form. We don't want you to be attaching and attaching and attaching a whole bunch of documents and then referring to them in your application form. You're going to be assessed based on the words that are written in your Smarty Grants application form. So the things that we don't want to be seeing here is we ask you questions, for example, describe your project, and your answer is refer to attachment A. That's going to be very difficult for the assessment panel to understand what your project is. So do include all relevant information directly in the text box in the application form. Now, a little acronym that's really good for you to remember as you're going through the application form and answering questions is CASH. We want you to be clear and consistent with the information. So clear, write clearly, be consistent. Some questions will be asked in different ways a couple of times through the application form. Just make sure you're consistent. If you're asking for a certain amount of money to do an activity, that's going to be backed up in the budget table and then backed up later on in the milestones. We want to see a consistent pattern to make sure that we know that you understand what your project is and what you're asking funding for. Be accurate, be as accurate as possible. Be succinct. So be very clear and succinct. Dot points are totally fine and even encouraged in parts of the application form. we will have a large volume of applications coming through. The assessment panel will need to review those, all of these applications. And the easier you make it for the assessment panel to read the questions and understand what you're saying, the easier it's going to be for them to actually understand the merit of your project and to assess it. Now, lastly, just be honest. Be honest and truthful. We want to know the right information. We want to know realistic things. You're going to be assessed, and the assessment panel will look at the information that you've provided and use their expertise to understand, that say you've applied for something and say you need, $1,000 to do this or $100,000 to do that. The assessment panel is going to be looking at value for money and providing kind of a measured assessment around, is that, a feasible cost? The other thing is, if you, we're going to be asking you about, any EPA or WorkSafe compliance issues. We will be sending any applications through to EPA and WorkSafe, so you may be subject to them actually reviewing your application. And if we do find certain things in the application that you haven't been forthcoming with, it will generate us probably asking a question of you. Now, the key dates, so kind of what's happening next. These dates are for, they're indicative only, but this is kind of where we're sitting at the moment. So the applications have been open. We've had a couple of information sessions already. This is going to be the last information session / workshop for the first stream of the Business Support Fund. Applications are closing Friday, March the 12th. You should be notified towards the end of July whether your application has been successful or unsuccessful. Now, that in particular is subject to change depending how many applications we get through and how long the approvals process is. We're providing that as a guide only. Now, projects must start by Thursday, the 11th of November. Again, this will be slightly flexible depending when you're notified of your application. One thing that isn't flexible though is when Stream 1 projects must be complete, and that's by the 30th of June 2022. So all contracts that we enter with you, funding agreements, must complete by the 30th of June 2022. So what is the application process? Firstly, eligibility assessment. So if your application does not meet eligibility criteria, it won't be accepted. Your application will be assessed based on what is written in your application form. Make sure that you're eligible. Make sure that your project is eligible. Merit assessment. So an assessment panel will review and assess all eligible applications against the merit criteria. If we need any extra information from you, we may seek this as a clarification. Now, don't take this as an assumption that you can leave fields blank in the application form. You certainly can't. We can only ask clarifying questions. So if you've written something in a particular way that we didn't quite understand, or if you provided a certain amount of information or evidence that we needed to find out a little bit more about, that's a clarification question. If you leave a section blank in the application form, we're not going to be asking you any more information to complete that. So eligible applications are individually assessed. What I would say is pay attention to weighting in your application. You need to focus on the areas with a higher weighting. If it's worth more, we're probably going to be asking more questions there, and there's going to be more room for you to talk about your project there. Now, any clarification questions are going to be emailed to you. You'll have around 2 business days to respond to any queries. Now, this period is likely to be in the week commencing April the 12th, so about 1 month after you submitted your applications. Strong recommendation is be aware of those dates, book the dates out in your calendar. This period could coincide with any Easter holidays that you have booked. What we're going to do is email you any clarification questions. So firstly, make sure that your email address is correct. Secondly, if your email address changes, notify us as soon as possible. And thirdly, have access to that email address during the clarification period. But during the whole process, you should have access to that in case we need to get in touch with you. So due diligence checks are going to be conducted on recommended applications only. And applications that pass all of these checks will then continue through our approvals process. This could last several months. And as I mentioned earlier, you should be notified of the outcome in July 2021, not before, and could potentially be after. That is an indicative date only. So one of the FAQs that we generally have, something that we hear quite commonly, is why does the approvals process take so long? Now, there is a very thorough assessment process in place to ensure that all applications are assessed in a fair, transparent and accountable manner. Applications are first assessed against the eligibility criteria, followed by the merit criteria, and then due diligence checks are carried out on applicants involved in the delivery of the project. Finally, the recommendations of the grants are then approved by the CEO or the Minister. So this is quite a long process, particularly depending how many applications we get through. We do need to ask for your patience during this process, and we understand that there is a long timeline and that you're probably excited to get started on your applications, but you cannot begin any projects that are going to be funded or project activities that you're seeking funding for until you have a signed contract. So we're going to dive into the application form now. So I'm going to end our slideshow and take you directly into the application form. Before we do that, I might welcome you to ask any questions, just initial questions on kind of the process, anything that I've said to date. If you do have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat now. Our moderators can answer those in writing. And now we're going to move across to the application form. So when you click into Smarty Grants to start an application, this is the page that you're going to land on. It's the Sustainability Victoria Smarty Grants page. So as you can see, there are a few different rounds of funding currently open with Sustainability Victoria. We have the Business Support Fund Stream 1 and 2. We also have the Recycling Victoria Communities Fund, Councils Fund, and the RD&D Fund for materials. You can find out any information about that by visiting the Sustainability Victoria grants page. Today, what we're looking at is this Stream 1 identification grants. So when you start your application, you're going to click on this, and it's going to bring you to the next page. Now you're going to have three choices right now. You can start a submission, you can preview the form, or you can download a preview form. So the download is really if you want to go through the application form offline, maybe make some notes, share it around with the team. If you want to start your submission, you'll click on this button, and now you're going to have to either log in or register. I've already got my own login. If you don't have a login, what you'll need to do is register. You'll put your details in there, you'll get an email from Smarty Grants, and then you'll be able to get started. Today, what I'm going to do is go through previewing the form. Now, remember, we've got a lot of links on this page as well. So if you ever get lost, come back to this page. You have your fund guidelines. You have the information bulletin, and then you have FAQs from the Smarty Grants process. So if you've got questions while you're going through the application, feel free to keep this page open and come back to the fund guidelines or have a look at the information bulletin, because the questions that you have might be answered already. They might have been asked by someone else, or they might be quite clear in the guidelines and application form. So right now I'm going to preview the form. So first things first is the instructions page. So this is the first page of the application. So eligibility is the first thing that we're going to be looking at. We're going to go through here. We're talking through which kind of organisations are eligible, the kind of project that you can be involved in, whether it's a lead applicant or a project partner, the length of operation. Be really clear about noting this. You need to be operating a minimum of 2 years. Or if you've been operating less than 2 years, you'll need to provide a company guarantee. Now, details of the company guarantee are provided in the information bulletin, so I'd encourage you to have a look for that question in the information bulletin if you're uncertain about the 2-year timeline. Okay, so if you are eligible to apply for funding, click yes, and it'll take you through to the next page. Or if you're not eligible, click no and you're not going to be able to proceed. One question that we are commonly getting is around eligibility, particularly with government organisations. TAFEs universities, for example, can they be part of the application process? Now, only eligible organisations and entity types can apply. Government cannot apply as either a lead applicant or a project partner. If you're curious about whether an entity is a government entity or not, or if they're an eligible entity, what we do recommend doing is going to the ABN lookup, which you can access via abr.business.gov.au. I'm going to post an announcement right now. This is a really handy tool for you to go in and see whether or not an entity is eligible. So let's say you are eligible, we're going to go to the next page. Okay, so in section 1, what we're looking for is your legal entity and type of organisation. Now, this is an eligibility hurdle, so you're going to be completing the applicant details here. Now, your business must demonstrate that it's been operating for at least 2 years by the closing date on March 12th. If you do not meet this criteria, company guarantee must be provided. No exceptions are allowed. It has to be operating 2 years by March 12th. Details of company guarantees as are available on the information bulletin. Now, one thing here is your email. If you change your email, you need to notify us because this is the only way we're going to keep in touch with you. If there's anything that we need to seek clarification on in your application form, this is how we're reaching you. If we don't reach you, there's a risk that we may not be able to proceed with the application. Okay, so project manager contact details, pretty self-explanatory. I won't go through there, it's not going to help you much. And then related entities. There's a bunch of information for you here to read about related entities. Make sure you answer this appropriately and honestly. If you do have any related entities, put them in here. You can view an example of what we mean. Now, I'm going to move to the next page. So section 2 is where things start getting a little bit more fun. So this is where we're going to start asking you about your project. On this page, you're going to be putting through your project title, a project description, talking through your project location, and providing a project timeline. So now, grant types. The first thing to consider is, are you applying as an individual business or a collaborative partnership? That's actually on the previous page, and that's where you'll be providing those details. Project description, what we're asking for here is a summary highlighting all of the key points of your project. We want you to be selective with your words. Now, time of project time at location or percentage of project time at location. Now, this refers to the specific amount of time that your project will be focused on this location. The answer cannot be below 50%. We need you to have at least 50% of project activities happening in Victoria. So for example, you might be implementing a project at a food manufacturing facility in Dandenong. Maybe 100% of the project time will be there. That's where you're going to put in the address and a percentage of the project time at that location. Or maybe there's a couple of different locations. You're going to be able to add multiple locations here by clicking the plus button. So you might have 50% at Dandenong, 50% at Keysborough, for example. Now, project timelines is when you're anticipating you're going to start the project and when you're going to complete the project. Now, projects must be completed by the 30th of June 2022. Do not put a date after that in here because that will make your project ineligible. We need to be able to be sure that you can complete your project in time within the funding agreement by the 30th of June 2022. Now, one thing I'm going to stress here is that we cannot fund any activities that you've already started or that have been finished. We can't retrospectively fund projects. An example of an activity that's been started, for example, is you've already purchased equipment and installed it. So that's been started, or if you've purchased the equipment, you've already started down the process of that project. We're not going to be funding that because you've already committed the money and it's not going to seem good value for money because you won't be able to demonstrate that funding is needed. So we're going to click through to the next page now. And this is section 3. And as you can see, as you continue through the form, you're going to be able to navigate via this sidebar. Section 3 is when we're actually going to start getting into the assessment criteria. So in section 3, this is kind of the big thing, the area that you're going to have to focus the most on. So you're going to be assessed against 4 criteria in your application form. Each have specific weightings to each area, and you should spend most of your time in the most weighted areas. So the first thing that we're going to look at is what you're going to do. That's worth 45%. My strong pro tip there is spend a lot of your time in the what section. We're then going to be looking at who's going to deliver the project. So that's when you get a chance to talk about the lead applicant and any potential project partners. Now, you're going to have to demonstrate why funding is needed, and that's a weighted criteria. And then you're going to talk about how the project is going to be delivered. So that's what I'm going to go through now, is each of these sections of the application form. The other thing that we will assess for is value for money. Now, this isn't a weighted criteria, but it is something that we will be considering. So now, what are you going to do? So 45%, that's this section now. And you can see by these green bars where you are in the application form as well. So this is worth 45%. 100%, spend the most of your time in this section. Now, question 1, we're going to be asking for a detailed overview of what you will do in your project. Now, think about the major milestones and deliverables of your project. How are you going to deliver these? What are you going to do to achieve those? What will the benefits be? These are the kind of things that you want to articulate in this section. And earlier when I talked about the CASH acronym being consistent, that's what we want to see. We want to see that your project overview flows into what you're going to be doing in your project, and later that's going to flow through to your milestones and your budget table. Now, strong recommendation here is that you refer to the fund guidelines. Question 2 is asking how you're going to deliver on the RV policy and strategic objectives. These are highlighted in the fund guidelines, and you can also refer to the Recycling Victoria policy, a new economy. So questions 3, 4 and 5, we're asking for you to provide details on the types of products or materials your project is going to focus on. Now, this includes what products or materials your project will focus on, how much waste there is, and where this waste is currently disposed or how it's managed. Question 6 is going to ask you about could your project potentially benefit any other materials, products or sectors? You know, could it grow over time? Could it influence broad change in an industry? So if your project, you know, potentially it's a pilot project in the food industry, potentially that could be rolled out to other businesses across the food industry. That's what we want to know in that application question. Now, one thing I'm going to be highlighting here again is that the word limits provided in this section are a guide. As you can see here, it must be no more than 250 words, 250 words, 100, 100, 500, etc. Judge the questions based on the amount of words that we're asking you to write, and that's going to help give you a hint on the kind of depth of response that we're looking for from you. Now, this is a guide only. What I would say is less words can sometimes and often be better. What we want you to do is be succinct and to the points, and dot points are totally fine. We don't need you to write in eloquent prose. When it comes to objectives, some projects are going to address 1 or 2 objectives strongly. That's fine. Just review the policy and objectives and write how your project is going to respond to that. You don't need to meet every objective. You might meet one, you might meet another, or you might meet a few. Where possible, use what information is available to you to quantify and provide the most educated estimation. So in these questions 3, 4 and 5, I understand that this is an identification grant. You might not quite understand what the opportunity at the moment is, otherwise you may not be applying for an identification grant. What we want to know is as much information as you already know. For example, you might not know how many tonnes of waste is being generated by your business, but you might know how much waste disposal costs your business, how much you're paying, let's say you're a food or drink manufacturer, how much it costs to dispose that to sewer. You might know that you're sending, you know, X amount of tonnes of waste to landfill or X amount of trucks a day. Or you might know broadly across the industry that this amount of waste is created and this is the impact of that waste. You can use a variety of different kind of informations and evidence bases to help make your case here. The clearer you can be with information, the better though, and the more specific is going to help us understand what the potential benefit and impact of your project is going to be. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask Sarah if any questions have come through so I can answer them as related to this question page on what.
Thanks, Travis. There are a few questions. One question, I think we have seen it before. If someone has operated for 3 years, but the business has changed structure a year ago, is that an issue?
If the business has changed structure a year ago, then they would have an operating history for 1 year only. What I'd recommend with that question, we have seen it come through, is email grants inquiries. They'll have a response and they can give you a little bit more detail than I can provide over the phone at the moment. I know we've referred that one off to our legal counsel for some advice, so please send that through and we'll get back to you.
Thanks. And another question that has come up twice is if someone does not have a specific address for their location, so they'll be going through various sites, either auditing various sites or events at random locations, what would the address of the project be, or what would you want people to put as their location?
I guess the key criteria here is that 50% of the activities are happening in Victoria. If you are headquartered in Victoria, you could put your location as the headquarter there. If you are looking at a couple of other sites, and then provide some additional details around the sites that you're looking for. If you're not able to provide exact information, you know, an estimate of information, maybe it's something that you could attach. If you're working, you know, that's, for example, you're a consultant and you've got in principle support to go and perform a materials efficiency assessment at a couple of different sites, articulate that in your application form, and that's something we'll just want to be able to ensure that we know that 50% of project activities and any project benefits are delivered in Victoria, so that we can sense check that that's meeting the eligibility criteria for the grant.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions for now.
Easy. Well, I'm going to jump on to the next section then, which is who. So who will deliver the project? Now this is worth 20%. So we're going to, there's two things that's going to pop up here. If you selected originally that you're an individual applicant, you will only complete details for yourself as the lead applicant. If you, in the early page of the application form, said that you're going to start the application as a collaborative partnership, then you're going to be completing details for the collaborative partnership, and this is including the lead applicant details as well as all details for the project partners. So individual details, as I said, will complete for their application only. Now note that funding agreements are only going to be established with a lead applicant, not with the project partners, but project partners may be subject to the same checks and balances that we do on lead applicants. Now what we're looking for here is, do you have the appropriate experience to deliver this project? Do you have a proven track record in delivering projects? The evidence we need to see is provided for project partners. One of the things that we get commonly asked is, what evidence do you need to show that someone is a project partner? So it's a good question that we hear. Firstly, I'll say that the lead applicant has all responsibility for delivering the project, all legal responsibility, and we're only, as in we, SV, will only contract with that lead applicant in a collaborative partnership. Now, for project partners, by the time funding agreements are signed, we may need firm evidence of a formal commitment from project partners, such as a memorandum of understanding or an MOU or a contract. Now, at this stage of the application, so when you're going through your application now, missing a formal MOU will not make your project ineligible. We might want an overview of the type of relationship that you've built with potential project partners already. Now, if you do have an MOU or a contract with project partners, any information to substantiate your claim of project partners, do please include this. It could be an email between you and a project partner, or it might be something more formal, or it might be a written explanation of the project partners that you have contacted, and we will firm that up throughout the application process when we, you know, after we've approved applications and start working with you on funding agreements. So, as I said, that's worth 20%. Don't spend most of your time here. It's probably quite a quick and easy section to get through. But again, if you've got any questions around who, please ask them now and I'll get Sarah to read them aloud.
Sorry, Travis, I was just trying to... Where am I reading aloud from?
Just if there's any questions that have come through around this.
Yes, there is. If there is a project to reduce food waste with special technology and UTAS is doing the validation, in order to be eligible, do these people need to move to a uni in Victoria who may not have the ability for perishables?
Sorry, I probably don't quite understand the question being asked. It sounds like it is a project-based question. Maybe ask that again, Sarah.
If a project to reduce food waste with special technology and University of Tas is doing the validation, in order to be eligible, do these people need to move to a university in Victoria who may not have the ability for perishables? So if they're working with a university in Tassie, does it need to be located here in Victoria?
That is a really good question. Look, we are looking to support Victorian businesses. We do need 50% of the project activities to take place in Victoria. We do understand that project activities will take place in other states, but if 100% of the project activities are taking place in another state, that would be ineligible for funding. If you did have some more questions around that project, what I would encourage you to do is email that through to Grants Inquiries. It sounds like something quite specific and I wouldn't want to say no to you right now. What I would say is that there is an eligibility hurdle that 50% of project activities take place in Victoria.
Thanks, Travis. That's the only questions about that.
Cool. Well, that's a pretty short section, so I'm going to move to the next one. And I apologise that all of the text is a little bit greyed out. That's just the way the preview form comes through. So the next section that we're going to look at is why, and this is about why is the funding needed. This is worth 15%. So through these questions, what we want to understand is why funding is needed for your project and how it represents value for money. What benefits will your project deliver? Now you need to reference the objectives of the program, the proposed deliverables of your project, and how your project will help us achieve the objectives of our program. Now the application will be assessed as a whole, so make sure your vision is clear. What we want to do is also understand how it's good value for money. You might be applying to complete an activity, for example, that we don't think is good value for money in delivering a certain objective. That's the kind of question we're going to be looking for. In this section, I want you to remember cash again, be clear, consistent, be succinct, be honest. In this section, we really want you to be honest and truthful about what would happen if you do not receive money. And we want to know a realistic estimate of what the broader benefits of your project are going to be. Now, the assessment panel will be experienced in this field, and we may call on technical experts throughout the application process to help us understand certain projects. So a frequently asked question that we get is, what if my project will not create direct or indirect jobs in the short or long term? So as you see in this application form, we're asking around, the estimated full-time equivalent employees generated as the result of the project. This is not an eligibility hurdle. Your project may not create any jobs, or it may create jobs. What we want you to do is answer this as truthfully as possible. And again, your application is going to be assessed as a whole. So preference will be given to projects that help us achieve our objectives. Now, some projects are going to do this in different ways. We're going to take this all into account during consideration of your application. So for example, you might not deliver any additional FTE, but you might develop a business case in Stream 1 that helps prevent waste by 10,000 tonnes. So this is really a weighted process, as I keep saying. So similarly, if your project has no training opportunities, which is another question that we've asked here about ongoing employment opportunities and training opportunities for the local community, it's not going to make your project ineligible if you don't have that. What we want to understand here is if your project can help support Victorian businesses to better understand and act on circular economy opportunities. What I'd ask you to consider, is there an option through your project to upskill employees or businesses during your project, either directly with training or indirectly, maybe via marketing the project outcomes. So things like publishing case studies, news articles, media engagements, industry reports and magazines. Promoting the work that you're doing will actually help indirectly provide training for Victorians to upskill them in the circular economy. You can provide details about that here. So, any questions on the why?
Yes, there are. Can you start working on market research for your project before the funding is announced?
Certainly, I would imagine that you are doing market research and project planning as part of, you need to work out, is this project something that you can apply for? What we won't fund are activities that you've already done. So if you, for example, in your funding application said that you needed $20,000 to complete market research, but you've already done that work, we're not going to fund it. Anything that you're asking for money for in the application, you can't start until you have a signed funding agreement. But you will need to do research on your application, and we strongly encourage you doing research, looking for the market opportunity, looking at how much waste is out there, looking what the benefits of your project can be, looking at what potential solutions are, looking at the cost of particular things, because that's going to help you write a more complete and thorough application form. When we ask you, what are the milestones of your project? What are you going to do? We're also going to ask you how much that's going to cost. So having an idea of those things, go out and get quotes, Google things, find information, find as much information as you can, because that's going to help your application form.
Thanks, Travis. One more question. Do customers of a business from whom we collect waste, are these considered to be project partners?
A project partner is only someone that's going to be involved in your project, someone that's going to be working on the project. That's up to you to define who the project partners are. By the sounds of what you're suggesting is a customer of the person that you're working with is not a project partner. So if you're the lead applicant, you're working directly with someone who's contributing to that project, they could be your project partner. Their customers would not be project partners, I don't imagine, but that's something you're going to have to look at with the reading through the questions and looking at finding more information about the project partners, which you can have a look at in detail in the fund guidelines and also on the information bulletin. One thing that I would suggest here is a project partner is not necessarily, let's say, a consultant, so someone doing the work, doing the activity. If you are a business that wants to do a materials efficiency assessment, you might say that we need X amount of dollars to hire a consultant to complete this for us. That's totally fine. That consultant wouldn't be a project partner. That's just an activity that you're funding through your project.
Great, thank you, Travis. That's all the questions for now.
Cool. So what I'm going to do then is go through to the last of the merit-based criteria, which is how the project will be delivered. So under the how section, we're asking you how will the project be delivered. We're asking you what are the key activities and timeframes, and we're providing you with a table to complete these. So government grants are managed to milestones. Milestones are how grants are paid. So each milestone requires evidence of completion, and they can include several activities. We've provided an example on this page, as you can view, of how to complete this section. What we want to do is understand what are the major milestones of your projects and how are we going to pay you for those, and what kind of evidence would we be looking for to prove that you've completed those milestones. You're going to have at least one, that's mandatory. A lot of projects that we work with have 3 milestones, but some have several, up to a dozen milestones, depending on the complexity of the project. The information you provide in here will form the basis of contracts with any successful applications and will inform the development of your funding agreements. It also really helps you step out and plan what your project. The information that you provide here will show us that you have a really good and clear understanding of the phasing of your project and the activities of your project and the estimated cost to complete those activities. In this table, it's going to be saying what the total milestone cost, that automatically populates. We're going to be looking for milestone number, which will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending how many milestones you have. Who's responsible for delivering that milestone? So for example, if you're a lead applicant in an individual applicant, you're going to be responsible. If you have project partners may be responsible for some of those. So for example, the University of Tas example, maybe the lead applicant's based in Victoria, they're running the project, but the University of Tasmania was completing one part of that project, and that would be maybe one milestone. We want to know what the key activity is happening under the milestone or activities, when it's going to start, when it's going to end, and what the estimated cost is going to be, so on and so forth. You can add as many milestones as needed. What I would suggest is try to bucket them so you don't have 20 different milestones throughout your projects. And if you do have any queries, just get in touch with us and we can help you out. But do review the example that we provide as well. So the other thing that we want to understand is how will you ensure the project timelines are realistic and achievable? We're asking you about the timelines here against the milestones, and we want to know, we want confidence that you can deliver within those timeframes, and that's why we're asking this question. If you have a project plan, we want to know, and this gives you a chance to attach your project plan here. This is going to help give us even more confidence that you know what you're going to be doing through the project. This is about providing the assessment panel with confidence that this can be delivered within the time, which is until June 30, 2022. If you don't have a project plan, that won't make you ineligible at this stage. You can provide details through the milestones. Will show a bit of a higher level version of a project plan, but what we can also ask you to do here, or what you can provide, is information on when a project plan will be finalised and who will be involved in this. So it's a question that you'll be asked to write into a text box. Now, has the project plan been agreed to by all project partners? Obviously, this is only relevant to collaborative partnerships, but we will ask you to provide details here to suggest, what is that relationship with the project partners and do they agree with the project plan? Again, if you don't have that in place, provide some words to explain how you're going to be getting that project plan into place and what your plan is to work with your project partners to ensure that the project plan is finalised before the signing of the funding agreement. We need to know that you have the right permits for your project. You may not have them in place at the moment, that is totally fine. But what we want to know is that you've researched what permits are going to be required, and we want to know how you're going to obtain it. Now, we can't advise on the permits required for your project. That's something that's going to be in your technical realm of expertise. We just want to know that you've researched and are aware of the kinds of permits that are required to complete the work that you're doing. Now, the final section here is around project monitoring and evaluation. So we want to know throughout the project, how are you going to monitor and report on the results? So we want to know how you're going to collect data, whether it be quantitative or qualitative throughout the project. How are you going to evaluate the project? How are the outputs going to be measured? How are the outputs going to be shared with SV and the broader Victorian community? So again, that comes back to the earlier question we asked around, what kind of education opportunities will you provide to accelerate a circular economy in Victoria? And what risk management strategies and practices are in place? One of the questions we do get here in queries is around outputs. So an output from your project is the tangible and the intangible products that result from your project activities. So for example, a written feasibility study is an output. This is different to an outcome, which we do ask questions on. And an outcome is the benefits that a project or intervention is designed to deliver. So for example, reducing waste by 500 tonnes or reducing emissions, etc., etc. I'll pause here again for any questions that have come through on the how.
Yes, there's one question that has come through about in-kind staff work. If the lead applicant is also the manager of the project within a small team to deliver the project, is the time of the manager allocated to the project considered in-kind work?
We provide a really comprehensive response on what is in-kind on the information bulletin. What I'll do is encourage you to have a read through that. And if you have any specific queries, get in touch with the grants inquiries team. And I'm sorry to sound like going on and on about sending things through to the grants inquiries team. I just want to make sure that we're giving consistent advice, and that is the advice that we send to anyone that has sent through a query around what is in kind and what is not in kind. What we don't fund within the project is operational costs. If there is a dedicated project manager, that may be an in-kind expense. Have a look at the information bulletin and please get in touch with us if you do have specific questions around that once you've had a read through. And you might have had a read through already and you want to ask the question again, do feel free to get that in writing so we can give you a really thorough response on that.
Thanks, Travis. I've also just linked the email address for the Grants Inquiries team in the chat. Another question is, you mentioned the latest a project can start is November, but what will be the earliest a project can start if approved in July?
If everyone has signed off a contract in July, let's say that you've been approved, notified, everything's written and signed up in July, you can start the project as soon as all parties have signed that final agreement. We just want projects to start by November, and we think that's going to give enough time between when you're notified, which is about a 3-month window, I believe, from when you will be notified to when the projects would start. We do have really tight timelines on these projects. Obviously, it's around 12 months or a little bit less from when you're going to be notified about the funding agreement. So we want things to be happening as fast as possible. And once a contract's been signed, you can start working straight away.
Thanks, Travis. This might be a bit project specific, but the collection of data and sustainability initiatives, analytics and software development, does that qualify as a project to collect this information?
Look, it is a project heavy question, which I don't want to get into details on specific projects, so I'll set a precedent by not answering it at the moment, but please feel free to email that through to Grants Inquiries and we'd be happy to look at the eligibility of that kind of project, whether it's in scope or not in scope for this.
Thank you. And one more. With project monitoring, it's a bit unclear if we're providing monitoring over the identification project or anticipating what monitoring will be in place for the implementation, which is correct.
For these projects, it's going to be what's happening during the project. That's what I could say. We don't know that your project is going to be implemented afterwards. These are stream ones, so these are identification grants. You're looking for the opportunity and you're building the business case. We don't need to know what happens after that necessarily, unless you have information on that. What we do want to understand with this is throughout the process. So for example, you're doing a materials efficiency assessment or you're developing a feasibility study. How are you going to monitor and report on the results of that work throughout the project? So let's say it's a materials efficiency assessment. How are you going to collect the data from that assessment? That would be quantitative data, so it could be the volumes of the waste. And then how are you going to be reporting on it? So you might say we're going to be doing a waste assessment, we're going to be recording volumetric data because it's liquid, or weight data, etc. We're going to be looking at the composition of the waste. This is how we're going to be collecting the data. That kind of thing throughout this project would be suitable. This isn't about a long-term evaluation plan for next steps. We're only looking at within the project. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. That's all for now.
Awesome. So I'll move on to the next section. This is the final part of section 3 actually, and this is around your project budget. So the co-contribution for Stream 1 projects is 2-to-1. So for every $2 SV provides in funding, you must provide $1. Now that co-contribution can be made as cash or in kind. So we give $2 of cash, you can give $1, and that can be made up of 50 cents in kind and 50 cents cash. It needs to be no more than 50% in kind of your co-contribution. Now, this is a difficult thing to describe verbally because it is quite a complicated idea of in kind and co-contributions. Again, I would really encourage you to have a look at the guidelines and also have a look at the information bulletin. And if you do have questions around what is in kind, what is the co-contribution, please get in touch with us and we'll be happy to help out. So in the budget table, we're telling you what the project contributions are. So the minimum amount that you can request from us is $75,000. We're not going to provide less than $75,000. So you need to make sure that your project meets that requirement. The maximum amount for these grants is $200,000, excluding GST. All of our numbers are excluding GST. So the co-contribution ratio, 2 to 1, as I said, $2 SV to $1 for the applicant. And the maximum in-kind contribution, so that's your non-financial contribution, is 50%. So all contributions need to be supported by evidence. So things like detailed staff timesheets, if you are going to have a dedicated project manager or employ someone to run the project, and any other relevant documentation before contract milestone payments are going to be made. And again, that's looking at what amount of money are you looking for? What is the milestone? What is the activity? How much are you asking for? We're going to want the evidence to make sure that you've completed the milestone. So in this table, and it's going to be difficult to see actually the way that it's been set up at the moment, what you're going to have here in your actual application form is a budget table. And you're going to be able to write out what the numbers are and what you're looking for, providing estimated costs for the certain activities that you're looking for. We're going to look at the activity item, how much funding that you're looking for, what your contribution in cash is going to be, what your in-kind contribution, and then what the total item cost is. So that's per activity. So, you know, it might be consultants is something, feasibility study, you know, developing collateral, etc. The kind of activities that are allowed and in scope are covered in detail in the guidelines. So have a look at the guidelines. We also provide a budget table example to help you understand how to complete the budget table. Now that is going to be super high level and generic, so don't copy what's in there. Be very specific to your project and provide as close an estimate as possible at this stage. We understand that you may not have the exact costs, but we want to know what the close estimates are going to be. Activities and items are going to need to be realistic. The thing that can really help you out here is get a quote if you can and research it. So a couple of FAQs that we do get in this section. Can I apply for funding for the same project in more than one of Sustainability Victoria's funding projects? So applications cannot be awarded funding for the same project in more than one of SV's funding programs. So each funding program has different objectives, eligibility requirements, and assessment criteria. So any application should be very specific to the funding program applied for. Now, if an applicant fits the criteria and meets the objectives of more than one funding program, then they can apply, of course. But Sustainability Victoria would not award funding from two different programs for the same project. The other question that we often get is, can we apply for funding for a project partly funded through another organisation? No. So if projects have already received funding or support for the same activities that you're applying for from other sources, including other projects awarded by funding through other Recycling Victoria, Sustainability Victoria, government, you know, initiatives, grant initiatives, they're not going to be eligible for funding. If a project is seeking funding for new activities, however, that haven't been funded from other sources, these may be eligible. We understand that with feasibility projects, you might go through different phases before you reach that implementation. So you might do a pre-feasibility study, you've received a grant for that, and then you're looking at doing the feasibility study or the site-specific feasibility study. We're not going to fund that initial work that was done on your pre-feasibility, but if the feasibility or the site-specific feasibility is what you're looking for, or maybe a pilot project or trial, and you've not received grant money from that, that's the kind of thing that you could apply for, because you've not received money for that activity before. Even though it's a related project or the same kind of long project, we're looking really at the activities that have been funded. If it's been funded before, don't apply for more funding. If it hasn't been funded, that is something that you could apply for funding for. I'm going to pause there again and see if any more questions have come through around the grants and around the funding, the budget and co-contribution.
There is a question, not specifically to that. The question is just about how innovative does the project need to be? what if there is already a solution in use in Victoria, but you want to deliver something similar in a much bigger way? Is this enough to be eligible?
I don't want to get into project questions at this time. What I would say is email that through to the grants inquiries team. Also have a look through the guidelines. We do go into detail around innovation. Have a look at the definitions of the project. So in the guidelines right at the bottom, we actually define a lot of things, including recycling. We do get a lot of questions about innovation in recycling. We also get a lot of questions from people that probably haven't read quite thoroughly the application form. We tell you what kind of projects are in scope and what we're not going to fund. So projects that we say we're not going to fund, we won't fund. That might be curbside recycling. It could be existing recycling solutions. If you've got a specific question, for your project, get in touch with Grants Inquiries and we'll be able to help you out.
Thank you, Travis. And one more, requirements such as hardware, equipment, warehouse logistics, will these be funded and justified as part of project costs?
So what can be funded and won't be funded is in the guidelines and application form. In the Streamline projects, we're looking not for implementation projects. We are looking for things like, if you're looking for hardware, we may be able to fund purchasing or leasing of equipment to complete, for example, a feasibility study, to complete a pilot project or a trial. We do cover that in detail in the guidelines, so please have a look through there, what's in scope and what we won't fund. And if you did have specific questions to your project, you know what I'm about to say, Grants Inquiries email.
Thank you, Travis. That's all.
Awesome. Cool. So the next page that we're going through is one of the final sections, and this is about due diligence. So this section is covering your insurance. This is about public liability insurance, professional indemnity insurance, work cover insurance, and then we're going to look at environmental safety and workplace compliance. Now, when it comes to insurance, insurance is a mandatory and non-negotiable. Do not try to negotiate with us on this point. If you do, we're going to say it's non-negotiable. We say what the minimum insurance is, and that is fixed. So for example, for these projects, for public liability insurance, you will need to have a minimum $10 million policy. For professional indemnity, you will need to have a policy amount at a minimum of $5 million. And you will need to have work cover insurance, if relevant to the project that you're looking for. No agreement can be signed if there's no appropriate insurance stated at the minimum dollar value. Now, please speak to your insurance advisor if you're unsure. If you don't currently have the insurance, you can provide an explanation on how you're going to get the insurance before the funding agreement is signed. Now, environmental safety and workplace compliance. Your history with environmental safety and workplace compliance will be investigated by relevant authorities if your application does proceed through the approvals pathway. Please be honest about these. Each application is taken on a case-by-case basis, and we may seek clarification. So, for example, having a breach of environmental safety or workplace compliance history is not necessarily going to rule you out, but we may need to investigate that further and have a discussion with you about that. Now, finally, we're going to ask you about conflicts of interest. If you're unsure about potential conflicts of interest, please review the definitions in the fund guidelines and email any further questions to Grants Inquiries at sustainability.vic.gov.au. We do provide a comprehensive detail in the guidelines of what constitutes a conflict of interest. If you're unsure, please do email us. The other thing that we will do, and this is the reason why we have the 2-year minimum threshold, we will conduct financial checks. And that happens quite quickly once we get through the eligibility process of applications. So we need you to agree to provide information to third parties so we can complete that financial assessment. Before we move forward, do we have any more questions about the due diligence section?
There is one question about if a project if someone is currently running a project that is funded by Sustainability Victoria and it is not yet finished, can that person apply for this RV grant as a realisation of the current project, i.e. to manufacture the pilot plant equipment? Does the current project need to be finished before they apply for a new grant?
It's a good question. Each project is going to be different and are at different stages of readiness. What we need to have with these projects, we've got start dates, we've got completion dates. You need to start within a certain time and you need to complete it within a certain time. There are certain objectives that you're going to meet. If you can meet the objectives of the project, if you can meet them within the time and within the amount of funding that's been looking for and you're eligible, then I certainly wouldn't be saying no. Get an application in if you meet all of those criteria. What we would want to be understanding is the evidence base that's taking you from the work that you're doing now into the next work. Is the thing that you're applying for predicated on the work that you're doing now that's incomplete? Will it be complete before you do the next step? You can articulate those things in your application form in the what are you going to do and a bit of a program outline at the very beginning.
Great, thank you. And there's a question here. How would the deviation of scope during the feasibility study be handled?
That sounds super technical, and I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. I guess it's going to be related to each project. Yeah, I think that might be a question for grants inquiries because it does sound quite technical, and I myself am not someone that is versed in doing feasibility studies, so I wouldn't want to provide advice on deviation of scope.
Great, thank you. That's all.
Cool. So, final page that we're going to get to is the checklist and declaration. On this page, what you want to do is review everything, make sure all of the information is clear and accurate and complete. One thing I would recommend doing is saving your application before you get to this page and just reviewing anything that wasn't completed to make sure it was. You can go back through your application by using these navigation tools on the side. One thing that you can do on this page, well, you're going to be stating that everything is, to the best of your knowledge, true and correct, which is why I keep harking on making sure that you're true and honest through the application process. You'll be providing your name, position and the date. Now, there is an option to attach additional information. One thing that assessors really don't like is when applicants attach everything that they have to do with the project. We're going to be looking at the words in your application. That's what's going to inform what you're applying for money for. We do have to, or the assessment panel does have to review every attachment that you submit. So what I would say is attach only the relevant attachments. So for example, if you have a company guarantee, that is a relevant attachment. What isn't relevant is a 100-page project plan. If you can't describe your project in the 500 words allocated, it's going to be very difficult for the assessors to understand your projects. They will read through the 100-page application, but it's going to be very difficult for them to understand what you're going to be delivering if that's the level of detail that you need to convey. So attach only the relevant attachments, only things that are going to substantiate the application. Don't attach something that you've already said in the form. We don't want duplicated information. If you've got a mock-up of a product, for example, or a website being developed, this might be useful. Things like drawings or site plans, just to substantiate kind of where you've gotten to in the project already. The question that was asked already, we've been doing this project and we're looking to take the next step. If you've got that, details of that project completion, maybe, a one-pager about that project, you could attach that in. Maybe it's a letter of support. What we don't want is you completing questions and then referring to attachments in your response. So refer to attachment 3, section 4.1. We don't want to be doing that. It makes it a really difficult process. Our assessors will have a lot of applications to read, and you want to make this as easy as possible for them to understand your projects. That's my 100% top tip for you, is make this easy, make it really clear, help them to understand really clearly what your project is, how it's meeting the outcomes of the fund, and what we're going to get from investing in your project. Be succinct through your application, be clear, avoid jargon, avoid unnecessary words, avoid unnecessary attachments. One big thing is give it to someone to read who doesn't know anything about your project. Assume that we're not going to know anything, because we're probably not. Each application, we're going to be learning new things. We're going to be learning new things about your project. This circular economy space is really new. It's new to Victoria, to Australia, to Sustainability Victoria. This is one of the first times that we've really invested in, projects focused on waste prevention, and the scope of the Business Support Fund is so wide that we are going to be seeing a whole range of new things that we haven't seen before. It's your job to make that so clear that we really understand what you're applying for funding for and what the benefits of that project is going to be. There are tools that can help you with writing if you're looking for that. Grammarly is one tool. Hemingway app is a tool that I use all the time to help with my writing. And basically you can review the words that you've put down and it will help you write more simply. It'll tell you if you're writing too complexly, and they often provide simpler ways for you to write sentences. I would really recommend you have a go at looking at those applications just to help bring your writing down to what I would say is like a grade 8 level is a really easy way for people to read an application. And Hemingway app, which I use all the time, it will tell you what grade your writing is at. Don't feel like you need to blow us away with the impressive technical talk of your application. Simple and clear is always going to be your best friend in writing these grant applications. Once everything is done, you'll be asked to submit. I don't have that button here, but close. Submit your application. Once it's submitted, you can't get back into it. If you did need to get back into it, email us as soon as possible and we will help you try and open the application form. As I said earlier, don't do that within the last day or two of the applications. Try to submit as early as possible. What happens next? Each application will need to be reviewed, assessed for eligibility criteria. It's going to be assessed. We might gather some extra questions or information from you. As I mentioned earlier, be free during that week in April around Easter. If you are successful, we'll be in contact to negotiate or finalise the funding agreement. This will happen around late July, but it is subject to change. I don't imagine it's going to come forward. If anything, it'll go backwards, like into August. Once the funding agreement is agreed and signed, you can start your project. If you are unsuccessful, you'll be notified via email. You can request any feedback or apply again in future rounds or different funding programs. So being unsuccessful is not going to stop you from applying for future rounds. And if you did want feedback, we can provide that to you if you were unsuccessful. So that really wraps up everything I wanted to cover for you today, which is really just a deep dive into the application process. Feel free to ask. We've got 15 more minutes. If you do have any questions, please try to keep them to the application form and process. I'd be happy to try to answer them now. And if you did find this session valuable, or if it wasn't quite what you were expecting, feel free to write some comments in there as well. This is the first time SV has actually gone through and done a deep dive into the application form. It's the first time I've done this. It'd be really great to get some feedback from you, whether or not you found this helpful or not helpful, or if you wanted to see something else. At the end of the day, we really want to help you write a good application. We want you to get through this process as easily as possible. So at the end of the day, we can get some great projects happening in Victoria. We're open to the different tips and tricks that we use to help make the process easier for you. And as someone that manages grant processes, I am super open to feedback from you on things that have worked or things that aren't working or things that you need clarity on. So any feedback that you can provide is always welcome. You can do that via emailing grants inquiries. You can do that via emailing the CBIC inbox, which you can access on the website where the grants are posted, or you can provide some feedback now if you just said, yes, this is great, or no, this wasn't great. Please just feel free to put that into the chat. It's not going to be sent to anyone. We won't post it publicly, but it's just really good for us to know. Now I'll throw across to Sarah just to see if any questions have come through and spend the last 15 minutes or so answering them.
Thanks, Travis. There are a couple of questions. The guidelines state that successful Stream 1 projects can apply for funding to implement opportunities under Stream 2. When will Stream 2 be starting?
So right now there is a Stream 1 and a Stream 2 in market. We haven't announced when the future rounds would be, but that is certainly the workflow that we'll be looking at doing. Pay attention to the key dates. Obviously Stream 1 projects need to be finished by the 30th of June. So what we would like to do is make sure that there is kind of a pathway forward for those projects in the future. It wouldn't necessarily happen during while you're actually conducting the projects. We haven't provided any advice on that, and that needs to go through an approvals pathway before we announce any of the next streams though.
Thank you. We spoke a bit about supporting documents and attachments. So what sort of supporting documents are helpful?
So at times throughout the application form, it'll ask you for it'll provide you areas to substantiate things with a supporting document. So, you know, a project plan would be an example of something that you could attach, and we'll ask you specifically around the project plan to attach it there. If you have drawings, like I said, so you want to do develop a piece of equipment or something that is going to do this thing that prevents waste, you know, any drawings that you have or site plans that you have to conduct a feasibility assessment, little things like that. We don't want a 100-pager about your project. We don't want all of the information in the world about your project, because we think that you should be able to articulate that in the application form. I would rather you not attach anything in your application at all if it's not needed. You should be able to make your case and get your best foot forward during the application form, and that is my strong recommendation. What you do, if you're asking what is a good idea of an app, you know, something to attach, don't attach it because it's not needed.
Great, thank you. And in regards to a partnership or collaboration budget, does the partner have to provide in-kind support?
So we just So there's two ways that you can apply. Obviously, you can apply as an individual applicant, or you can apply as an applicant in a collaborative partnership where you have the lead applicant and a project partner. Our contract is with the lead applicant. That lead applicant needs to make sure that the funding requirements are met for the project. So this is a 2-to-1, 2 SV dollars to 1 project dollar. That dollar could be serviced by the lead applicant or the project partner in whatever split they want, as long as they're meeting the co-contribution and the ratio of in-kind allowed. We don't care what the split is between lead applicants and project partners, as long as you meet that kind of headline objective, which is 2-to-1 within the price that we're saying that we will give funding for, and within the in-kind support, which can't be more than 50% of the co-contribution towards the project. So don't think about it as who is delivering the money, just think about it as what money is needed for the project and from the funding.
Great, thank you, Travis. And that seems to be all the questions we have.
Awesome. Well, if you've got any more, feel free to flick them through now. I'll give you a few seconds to write something down, and if not, we might wrap up early and we can all have 10 minutes back in our calendars for the day. What I will say, while you might be writing any more questions, we are going to be putting this video online probably in the next week, and anyone that's attended today's session will just send you an email afterwards to thank you for coming along and send you a link to when the video is posted in case you wanted to have a look at it again. Any questions come through, Sarah?
No, nothing else. I think you've done a good job of covering everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming along today. Again, please feel free to let us know if this was a good session or if it wasn't quite what you were expecting. If there's anything that's been missing through the information sessions or workshops that you really wanted some help with, please let us know. You know, there will be future rounds of this funding, and I want to make this as seamless as possible for you and help you as much as we can, so you can get some really good applications in. But thank you again. Great to, well, see you. I can't see anyone that's in the session, but looking forward to seeing some of your applications come through in a few weeks' time. Thank you.